welcome back to Leaders on Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Manal Bernoussi, and I'm so glad to be back and share with you all this new episode as we are wrapping up 2023. If you missed the previous episodes, go check them out. They're available for you on the main podcasting platforms. My guest today is a true vehicle for change. She has spent the last 8 years professionally specializing in the mentoring, coaching, and advisory of top-level executives, both in public and private organizations worldwide, using Deloitte London as her primary vehicle. She has also devoted over 13 years of her life consciously studying, exploring, and expanding human consciousness and continuously tuning herself to become the instrument she needs to be for the people she meets and elevates. Camilia Berrada is my guest today. We both met through Dina, who you all know by now. During a 6-week mental fitness journey, Camilia was facilitating with Sherzad Shamin, the author of New York Times bestselling Positive Intelligence. Such an insightful experience for me. I'll tell you more about that in just a second, which helps you develop habits to reach greater mastery over your own mind, quiet the negative, and activate the positive regions of your brain. So, and we'll definitely touch on that because I do want to share some of those nuggets with you. Camilia, I'm so glad to welcome you. Welcome to Leaders on Purpose podcast. How are you feeling today?
Thank you, Manal. It's such a privilege to be here, and I'm feeling amazing and really well fed after our beautiful lunch.
We've been talking about this for a while. I'm so glad we finally get to sit down and have this conversation together. I feel this is happening exactly at the right time for both of us. This past year has been amazing, to say the least, eventful, and I'm really looking forward to get into all of that with you and unpack everything that has been going on. So to start with, I'd love for you to walk us through your own personal development journey. Like, tell us, when did it start? How did it start? Was there any defining moment that you would like to share with us?
I'd love that. And this year has been such a huge year of change for the two of us. And I completely agree that so timely in this December of 2023. My journey really, my conscious personal development journey, I would say, started 3 years into my corporate journey doing this work through Deloitte. And I remember I was advising Kumi Naidu when he was Secretary General of Amnesty International. And I was so obsessed with the work that I was doing, helping organizations expand and get the most out of their people, doing things in a more human way, optimizing potential. And even though we had spent years really honing our approach for change and implementing it in an applied way, meeting Kumi really gave me a mirror I didn't like. Mainly because he was such an embodiment of the change that he believed in. And to give you a little bit of context about him, he is originally from South Africa. He supported in the liberation of Nelson Mandela during apartheid. And he was such an activist, climate activist through 10 years at Greenpeace. And being in his presence made me feel like, whilst I had so much conviction in the work that I was putting out in the world, I wasn't necessarily walking my talk in the same way and applying it to my personal life. And that's when I consciously started this personal development journey. It actually started by me volunteering at the Buddhist Center in East London. And I found Buddhism as an additional tool to add to this work. And I started realizing that there were a lot of facets of myself, we can call it the shadow, but different people will call it different things, that made me feel really uncomfortable, whether it had to do with unresolved tension in terms of aspects of my relationship with certain family members, issues that I had in terms of my appearance and how people perceived me, and also deeper experiences that I knew were inside that hadn't necessarily been processed or felt in the right way. And what really, really fascinated me was how much resistance I had to actually leaning into those feelings, to actually allowing myself to process them, because I was someone who was really rushed and not very patient. And it's like, right, okay, I don't need to go to therapy. I'll do 2 sessions and it'll fix me completely, right? So there was a lot of self-brutality in the way I related to myself. And that's where things started. And it was like opening one layer of a never-ending onion, because a couple months later, I found yoga and started teaching that. I also started going on retreats. I didn't really understand, like I had a therapist, but I didn't really know what a retreat was or what happened when people took themselves away from the day to day. And that was also my first initiation into shamanism. So that was a pretty pivotal moment in terms of my identity and the body of work that I was putting out in the world.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that you touched a little bit on your experience during a corporate, and I know that you made the shift also going from corporate to entrepreneur, which I know many people in my audience would relate to, because they have that in the back of their mind. So I'd love probably for us to tap into that part of your experience, how much suffering there is in the corporate world, and it sometimes feels like a battlefield of wounded people.
Totally.
And because we're all working on our wounds, right? And it sometimes gets really difficult to navigate. And I truly, truly believe that if each one of us had this space to work on themselves and heal those wounds, there would be a lot less suffering. And actually more value creating, really. So I'd love for you to tell us, from your experience helping all these organizations, and you've helped so many of them worldwide, where does that suffering usually come from? And like, what does a toxic environment look like from the inside? And what steps do you usually take to start fixing that?
How long do you have?
I know, right?
This is huge. And I think this tension from within corporates is such a huge deal. I've experienced it personally, and I was also vehemently passionate about creating the right conditions for people to thrive in organizations. And the thing I always say is, it's not their purpose, or it wasn't when the kind of huge conglomerate organizations have been built that we know of. They were built to create profit, and they were built to exploit human potential. So there's a direct conflict of interest that's unsaid between change makers in the world who really want to unlock potential, and the business incentives that a lot of corporates still today operate by. If we think of financial services industry, consulting industries, not all of them, but the big ones have been based on those principles. And it's difficult when you're not aware that, one, that's the case. It's also difficult in a world where there's really great rhetoric, and we're seeing it now with millennials and people being more purpose-driven than ever, wanting and caring about the impact of their behaviors on the world, their ecosystem, not putting human beings at the center of the universe. And for me, I think there's a personal and a professional part of my answer to your question. I really feel that, having been through the last few years outside corporate and being a little bit, traveling the world, being in completely extraordinary environments, I've really discovered what true safety actually means. And looking back, even though I knew there were some difficulties within these organizations, I didn't realize how unconsciously toxic they were. And that's not to put the blame on anybody directly. It's clearly a leadership responsibility, and leaders are supposed to create the right conditions for people to flourish and thrive inside. But it's really, really hard to do, and pretty much impossible to do if those leaders in question haven't created that levels of safety in their own lives and their own bodies. And so often they haven't gone on those journeys. So to me, it's not a safe space for people to show up unfiltered. And you know, the way I often explain it is, one of my clients said this week. He said, working at a corporate is like going to a casino. The odds are stacked against you. No matter what, you're very, very likely to lose, because if you win, the corporate or the casino wins. And if you lose, it's you who loses. It's not the organization. And so the odds are against you. The odds are against you. And as humans and as someone who values freedom, it's a really, really challenging place to evolve. And so there needs to be a lucidity of what's normal and what's not. There needs to be, you know, boundaries that are put in place in terms of what you as a human inside a corporate are willing to tolerate or not. And also, something that people don't realize is when you join corporate at an early level, there's a lot of structure. So the expectations, which I don't believe in, by the way, I believe in agreements, but the expectations are clear in terms of what you're supposed to do. There's a lot of work that and outputs that are expected of you. As you get more senior and you climb up the ranks of those large organizations, the structure gets flimsier. So really, there isn't a clear way of making decisions. There isn't a clear way of deciding what the resources of the organizations are going to be used towards. It's just heavily influenced by the human dynamics, the preferences of those individuals and their own belief structures and systems. And a lot of people haven't been trained for that. So they end up inheriting all this kind of influence and decision-making power when they've been told what to do for most of their careers, and they don't really know what to do with it, or they start to use it in ways that are beneficial but inherently humanly biased. And so there's really a need for people to feel better who decide that corporate is for them long term.
Absolutely.
To do this work, and also normalizing that it's not normal to be pushed to work so hard, not respect the cycle of the body. You know, how many burnouts have we been hearing of in the last few years? And for us to take radical responsibility for our own well-being and our choices as to what's best for us, whether it's staying or taking the leap.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that responsibility piece for sure. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper on what you usually notice as being toxic behavior or environment. Like, what is usually going wrong in organization in terms of personal, interactions, or probably what are the things that corporates or leaders need to be aware of in order to avoid the toxic environment?
I mean, this is a really wonderful question, and I'm so glad you asked. And I could give you a superficial response, which is also accurate and useful. For example, we could talk about the unwillingness of corporates to tolerate genuine failure, and how failure is an instrumental part of experimentation, creativity, and innovation. We could talk about, the way corporate uses structure and rank. So depending on your title, right, you having the power, whereas actually some of the best initiatives I've put in place are places where graduates are giving long-standing partners advice on what to do, and we're utilizing youth and people who aren't as institutionalized or tainted. So there's a lot of symptoms and at a behavioral level. But the truth is, the more I've done this work and the deeper I've gone, the more I've seen that a leader needs to taste waking up for themselves, because so much of what they're fueling in the world is actually unconscious. 99% of our behaviors day to day is unconscious. So they need to have those moments where things come together and they realize that they're operating within a certain pattern, right? Whether it's a perfectionist pattern, whether it's a reluctance to let go of control, whether it's, their inability to trust people, whatever it is. And that's not just their professional mask, that's who they are as a human, their journeys, that will affect all of their relationships. So that compartmentalization, doesn't really work. And the awareness piece can't just be hacked. It's not, here's a list of 5 things for you to do that you need to do. It's how are you continuously investing in yourself? Are you meditating daily? Are you connecting to nature daily? How consciously are you tuning out the outside noise to observe yourself as a witness? Do you have a therapist? Do you have a coach? Do you go on a retreat? So that you create the conditions for yourself as a leader to become aware of what you're instilling in the world. Because the biggest issue I found is this re-traumatizing without knowing that you're re-traumatizing. And it's our responsibility as if influential people.
That is so true, and thank you so much for underlining that. And I really do believe that, you know, in order to better connect with people, you need to connect with yourself first. And so doing that personal work and diving into those, you know, personal wounds and working on them is what allows to have a greater and more positive impact, for sure.
And no one wants to do that.
Yeah.
Because there's resistance there, right? Like, who wants to go and feel all the things that they've spent the last 35 years building defense mechanism to avoid, right? And so that's why safety is a portal. It takes some courage, and it gets to be really pleasurable. It doesn't have to be painful. And I think there's a real paradigm shift in people beginning to realize that this is not a nice to have for people who have time and resources, but this is one of our most pressing moral imperatives at this time, given what's happening at a societal level in the world.
Absolutely. It does take courage, absolutely. So I've touched a little bit about the fact that, you know, many of the people in the audience, and I've been there myself, and I know you've been there also, you know, taking the big leap from corporate to entrepreneur. And when we think about it, it's about building freedom for ourselves, right? So I'd love for you to tell us, what did freedom mean to you back then when you were in the corporate world? And what does it mean to you now? Has the definition evolved for you?
Yeah, that's, again, there's 2 questions there, but I'll start where you ended with freedom. I think when I was at Deloitte and I was wearing my Deloitte hat, again, I had created a really great setup for myself where I had a lot of freedom. And I think what it meant to me then was I was not willing to compromise on having an impact. So I refused to work on anything that wasn't truly valuable, according to very specific criteria that I held for myself. And that was interesting because that's not how most organizations work. Most organizations deliver what they're paid to do. So impact and choice and ensuring that my energy was being deployed in a socially useful way was freedom to me. And all of my energy went in optimizing that. And so I worked with very, very senior people, and I supported them on very deep individual and systemic issues. And I felt that that had ripples, and I was really, really proud and really happy with the level of impact that I had. If you ask me to define freedom today, I would say there's 2 levels. There's an outer level, which includes financial freedom, includes location freedom, and COVID's helped with that one and showing us what's possible and not. There's time freedom, right? What good is it making $10 million a year and being able to work from anywhere in the world and tropical places if you can't spend time with your children, if you are enslaved to a computer and are working 18-hour days? So all 3 of those I feel are important foundations of freedom on the outside. And the most important kind of freedom for me today is inner freedom. That's mental and emotional freedom. That's feeling good, feeling free from your mind and all of the thoughts. That's being able to, it's not feeling your negative emotions. It's not like not being angry, but it's who are you when you're being angry, right? And how much power does that have over you? And how much fluidity can you create in how you identify yourself to certain situations. So I would say I have a more rounded view of freedom. Impact is still fundamental in everything that I do. And I think, my modus operandi and how I work in the world is I care about making a difference. But I think I was sheltered when I was in corporate because I didn't have to worry about some of these outer elements. I had created the time freedom for myself, which is unusual in a Big Four. But because I had a salary that was consistently falling in my bank account every month, I never worried about that aspect and that security. And I didn't realize just how that stability and that security mattered until I decided to leap. And there was so much fear inside me about potentially losing some of those freedom aspects I just mentioned, because I was opening myself up to a host of all sorts of unknown. And that was really, really interesting as a journey, which I'm sure anybody who's transitioning will go through in some form.
Absolutely, absolutely. We definitely relate to that. Best form of luxury is that inner peace. I feel that's like the ultimate freedom. But as we're moving through this journey of self-development and personal development, then you get to experience different types of freedom. And I feel that the new generation today really values the time, location, and also the impact piece that you were mentioning. That's a huge one.
Our nervous system, learning to invest in that and being able to tolerate increasing levels of uncertainty is a huge part of gaining that inner freedom. So it takes being able to let go of things we've already gained and acquired and built to develop that. And it's like, the saying, new level, new devil. There's really, it's really hard to do. I was really, really, really scared that when I was fully all in my own business, that I wouldn't be able to take my mornings off for self-care, and I would have some responsibilities, and maybe some months it would be scary because I wouldn't have that guarantee of a salary. And whilst those fears were all valid, right, they weren't founded, because my life is so much more abundant than when I was in corporate, and things have been so much more expansive. So there was obviously an alignment there, but I would have never been able to carry on if I wasn't willing to tolerate that unknown. And you have to do the work and put in the reps so that that becomes normal. Entrepreneurship now is still a lot more uncertain than being an employee, and that being in relationship to that unknown is just part of my new normal now. Now, that's not to say that I have to live month to month, right? Like I'm immensely more successful on all those aspects of freedom than when I was at Deloitte, which is mind-blowing to me, given it's quite a recent thing. And you have to really relate to the inner and the outer part continuously. And so I don't think it would be possible for me to sit here calmly and do what I do and live the life that I do if I wasn't really investing in my nervous system.
There's another topic actually that I'd love to touch on with you. It's the topic of purpose. I know that word means a lot to you. It also means a lot to me. I'd love for you to tell us, what does leading on purpose mean to you? And how would you define your purpose in life currently?
Ooh, I'm loving these questions. I feel that the words I would choose right now, and they're just words in a constant evolution, my purpose in life right now is to wake global leaders up.
Love that.
And purpose is such a cornerstone for any of that work. I think I've always been really deeply purpose-driven. And when my first business partner and I first set up this structure from within Deloitte to work with senior leaders and executive teams and help them improve, develop their performance, develop their people and their organizations, we had different elements that we would bring together. We had like all of the tools, and at the time they were pretty rigid scientific tools. So like behavioral economics and performance science and psychology, right? Like, so all of the academic tools that you can make practical. We always took really complex business challenge that they shared ownership of. So for example, if they wanted to raise the diversity of their organization, that was not a matter of hiring a head of diversity that really didn't have anybody under them and delegating the problem away. It was an issue that really impacted every single seat at that table, and that mattered, and that they had to coalesce together on. And then the third was purpose. And we did so much work on purpose. And I remember when Simon Sinek was just becoming popular, something like 10 years ago. And he had just launched his Start With Why book. And I completely agreed, because purpose in many ways is what makes change stick. It's what enables the change to be sustainable. It's the glue that brings, all of these different people together, and the collective change that makes a difference. And I thought we really have to use purpose in a more embodied way and in a more embedded way in organizations, in a way that it's not done in most places. It's either a founder's really expansive vision and idea because they have an idea of how to change the world, but really it's just that human who believes in it. And in corporates, it's really great sounding words on a page that gathers dust on a strategy document that nobody ever uses in a practical way that influences decision. And I felt there was so much waste in organizations that happened because of that lack of alignment. And so we really set off on a mission to support people in finding their purposes, right? And it's like, how do you know? How do you know why you're here? How do you know what the purpose of your life is? What are you supposed to be doing? What's your highest contribution? And we developed these tools. I didn't want to develop these tools, by the way, but I couldn't find anything that supported people in actually really delving deep inside themselves to find that. And in a nutshell, we find out that if you bring three elements together, you can get pretty close. And one is around what makes you come alive. What do you, those flow states where you're so absorbed in doing something and nothing else matters, that you don't get hungry, you're not self-conscious, you don't need to go to the bathroom. You're just alive in that moment, so deeply present. And it's like, right, what are the aspects of your life where you feel that way? The second is around your deepest frustrations. So it's like, what really deeply aggravates you and triggers you and creates pain at a visceral body level that you don't even necessarily understand? You just really hate injustice and when someone's treated unfairly, or you get really, really emotional when something else happens, and it's like, that's another way in. And then the last one is your natural skills and talents. So those aren't skills that we learn by going on trainings or developing ourselves, as you and I are big fans of. These are things that come naturally to us, that always have come naturally to us, and they don't necessarily come naturally to other people. And it's like, for me, I was always obsessed with consciousness in human beings, and I assumed that that was everyone, right? And it took some pretty uncomfortable, embarrassing situations to realize, oh, actually, people aren't having the levels of thoughts and care about these topics than I do. And this is part of my path. So we spend a lot of time supporting leaders and delving inwards to find their place and decide, and rediscover, really, rather than decide, because it's not a creation, it's a rediscovery of what matters the most, and then supporting these executive teams and these leaders in connecting those individual purposes to the purpose of the organization. Because the organization is also a vehicle, and its function, its why, its raison d'etre is there for a reason. And if there's not a direct link between the CEO and the organization that they're running, you are in a position where there's no way you're going to be able to embed that. And so once you manage to do that, you see that actually the team's able to work much better together, and you're able to translate that meaningless word on a page into a really effective tool that flows through all levels of the organization and really helps people make decisions according to that lens of purpose, which is so aligned and feels like you're really contributing to something greater than yourself. So yeah, I love the title of your podcast.
Thank you. It means a lot to me, and I love that you brought that piece of aligning the individual purposes to the purpose of the organization, because I feel that's where the mismatch happens often, and that's also where we can lose a lot of the talent, also because of the lack of understanding of that individual purpose. But at the same time, I think it takes, courage and responsibility to devote time to understanding oneself, to listening to, because in order for us to answer those questions, you mentioned, what triggers you, what is really important for you, when are you in that flow state? All of this requires that you know yourself, you listen to yourself, and you have like those spaces where you can really tune into your inside state and be able to answer those questions, which is unfortunately not always the case in this crazy world where we're living.
Absolutely. And in many ways, it is a privilege. The one thing I have to say on this is we often look at this work as a nice to have because it feels like it's additive, and we don't have time. We're so tight on capacity and resources. And it's like, in an ideal world, of course I would love to go on retreat or join this mastermind or whatever it might be. But the truth is, there's a much greater cost of not doing that, because we are actually animals. Before being sophisticated, cognitive, left-brained humans who are able to create ChatGPTs and rockets that can get to the moon, we're physiological mammals, and our first unconscious mind is our bodies, and our nervous system is really wired for survival.
Yeah.
It's not wired for flourishing. It's not wired for growth or making us happy. It doesn't understand that. It's designed to keep us alive. And so unless you intentionally create the space for a rhythm, it's a lifestyle, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can still do everything that you do, and you're not intentional with it, you're not going to get those benefits, and they're so substantial that when you start, I've never met anybody who started on this path and then decided, you know what, this world's not for me. I'm going to go back to being blind. I'm going to go back to being less aware.
Once
because
you set a foot,
the level of inner freedom that unfold is so rewarding. And it actually, and this is where the magic happens in, more mainstream people who are less avid fans of this than you and I, is when they realize that everything that they do want to create in the world is actually much more effective, and their performance improves when they do slow down, when they do take the time. So there's a direct relationship between the two, and I encourage your listeners to ask themselves, okay, it's true, I might have to, clear a few more hours in my diary, and there's an opportunity cost to that, and there's a financial element to that. But what's the cost of me being in the same place a year from now? What's the cost of me not having solved this really tense situation at work that's not working? What's the cost of not having obtained the clarity on my legacy or this business baby that I'm about to birth and take into the world? And can I really afford procrastinating on that? And it's back to your priorities. How badly do you want it? And how satisfied are you with the current status quo of things in your life?
Absolutely. That is so true and so powerful. Thank you so much. And it takes me to, the victim mindset. The biggest step when you're going into this personal development journey is taking back full ownership of your own life and full responsibility of your own life, and just leaving behind that victim mindset. I love for you to help us articulate the thoughts and the narrative that goes into our mind when we're stuck in that victim mindset, and how can we get unstuck from that?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And this piece around responsibility is so key. And I know I was talking about really senior leaders today, but in the ownership sense, we are all leaders and we are all creators of our lives.
Absolutely.
And it takes us making the choice to take radical responsibility for ourselves. And really, at its essence, that's what conscious leadership is. It's taking radical responsibility for everything that happens, not blaming. You brought up the victim. So the victim mentality, the epitome phrase is, life is happening to me. Oh, why me? And it's all these circumstances, whether it's like your boss not allowing something particular, whether it's your car breaking down, whether it's you being left in a relationship, whatever circumstance happening, your attitude and your way of relating to that circumstance is feeling sorry for yourself and disempowering yourself in you are a receiver of this reality that you have no part in co-creating, which is totally false, right? And it's easy, and it can be really nuanced. It can go, where some elements of that mindset, which, crept up on me later in my personal development stages, was when I was triggered by loved ones, and I would blame them for making me feel that way, right? That's a more sophisticated version of still the victim, very primitive mentality. And it's like, no, I'm responsible for my state. At all times. No one has the power of making me feel a certain way. That is my realm. And it's like, so where are the situations and circumstances in your life where you're outsourcing your power away by blaming, oh, it's not possible because this politician, or it's not possible because this law, it's not possible because my boyfriend, it's not possible because my children are still young, and where are you making excuses in your life instead of taking your power away? In terms of what's available beyond being a victim, there's a step up is, we see this a lot in the personal development world, is becoming positive, and almost like instead of life is happening to me, you shift to life is happening for me. It's almost like you become the universe is conspiring in your favor. You're becoming partners, and everything can be turned into a growth moment and a transition moment and an initiation. And it's like the hard times, they're initiations and they're not going to last. And the good times, and it's like more and more and more, and the better it gets, the better it gets. So there's a lot to be gained to upgrading our operating systems and learning to have access to more expansive and constructive ways of feeling and thinking. And that's not the ultimate level. It's a huge step up from the victim. And once we have access to that already, I feel, our bodies are like instruments. Imagine how boring it would be if we could only play one song on repeat for the rest of our lives. And it's the same with these ways of being. We live in a world that really overvalues doing over being. But it's once you start to realize the power of your postures, of your state, of how you are, of your thought patterns, you realize there's a whole array of musical genres available there. And thinking positive thoughts is just one of them. It might be better than the victim. Ultimately, the one I support clients get to is when life is happening through you. It's not happening to you or for you. You're just the vehicle, and it's bigger than you. And that actually links well to our purpose conversation, because it really helps to be connected energetically in terms of where your heart is, professionally, to something that really enables you to be a force for change and support you in being in that flow state and living there all the time, not just when you're doing your hobby and surfing, on your holiday twice a year, but really in your day-to-day life, when you're interacting with the people that you do, when you're working, how can you always be in flow?
Yeah, I love that. Wow, I already had the piece of life is happening for me, not to me, but life is happening through me. I like that, absolutely. Amazing. So we were touching on all, these toolkits and tools that we have available for us, and I definitely want to get a little bit into the PQ experience that I went through when you were facilitating that seminar for us. So I really felt it was helpful for me to understand the different saboteurs and also the sage available for us, which is really just waiting for us there to activate it. That was really eye-opening for me, especially that, the saboteurs are sneaky. They're telling you one story for why they're there and why you're behaving a certain way, when in fact the reality is different.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to walk us through the different types of saboteurs and the lie behind each one of them, because I feel that's really valuable for our audience.
Yeah, so to just give people a little bit of context who don't understand anything about what
Yeah.
PQ is, PQ is positive intelligence, and it's really a way to get at this truth. And there's lots of tools, and this is a really great one, especially for people who are just starting out. And it's almost like we have different modes available to us at any particular time. And if we're in touch with our whole being, our deeper intelligence, our cognitive mind is connected to our hearts, and we're connected to our environment, then it's really easy to be open. It's easy to be creative. It's easy to, have a good time. It's easy to be open-minded. Think of it like when you're not under-resourced, you're not under budget, there's not been a crisis, and you don't have a deadline to hit, right? Which is really not the most environment most leaders live in, right? We're just living in an attention deficit economy where everything is trying to get a piece of us, and we're trying to deal and process enormously complex information and make really high stakes decision. And so the way our brains are wired is not for that creative, open, connected mode where it feels good and the energy is unlocked. It's for more of a judgment mode of operating. And the judge is almost the master saboteur, according to that paradigm, where we all have it. We all have that mode where, it looks different for some people. My judge is like a variant of princess entitled. I deserve better. And then sometimes I'll get into the more superior. Oh, there's a gap here. This person's not going to understand. So, and it's really interesting because it's really this isolated consciousness, which is much tighter, and it's more of the ego-driven. So the collection of saboteurs is really your ego.
Interesting.
And all of the different saboteurs, and to name some of the more common ones, the pleaser, the perfectionist, the controller, the hyperachiever, the hypervigilant, all of those are initially really great traits, right? Let's take having high standards, the perfectionist, right? Having high standards and wanting to do well is a really, really great thing. Being, achieving, if we take the hyperachiever, is a really great thing, wanting to achieve things in the world. The hyper-rational, being rational, that's really useful, particularly in today's society. I couldn't do my work if I didn't have some access to reason. And we get into trouble when we overuse those strengths. So those strengths taken to the extreme becomes some of our biggest constraints. Because if we stick to our perfectionist stickler example, high standards is great. And I realized as an entrepreneur, my standards were so high, right, that really I was not putting anything out there because I was trying to perfect my offer and perfect my product, and it just had to be perfect. And really, that's just not a really great way to having an impact if you're not interacting and sharing and delivering
Yeah.
in the world. And it's always going to be imperfect, and we're continuously refining our offers, and we're learning so much as we go, but it takes really putting it out there. And so often these saboteurs, they sneak up on you in ways you don't realize, because they're really deeply ingrained patterns
Yeah.
that have been fueled to just protect you, really. They're doing their job, and we're no longer aware that they're happening. So for me, I really realized there was a fear of visibility, right? Which once I disarmed the perfectionist in me, that was obvious. And so I could relate to that. And it's like, right, okay, how do I become more visible? You know, and to the point where hosting a podcast like you with 2 bright lights and 3 cameras, I haven't even prepared for this. You know,
Absolutely.
it's really beautiful that this gets to be this Friday afternoon, right? But if you had told me this 4 years ago, that saboteur would have flipped out, right? And it's like, well, how am I going to come across? And what do I say? And what if I don't say the right thing? And who's going to listen to it? And who's your audience? And just this really thinking consciousness. And so the whole point is there's a simple framework available and others where we get to support you in looking in the mirror and gaining awareness and gaining control as to what are these modes and these patterns that are ruling you constantly that you don't even know. And the interesting part is really, how do we create new ones?
Yes.
How do we create new pathways? Just like we're seeing everybody understanding the importance of sleep these days and the importance of movement, right? This is like going to the gym. How do you build the right mental muscles and neural pathways? And our brain is so capable and so neuroplastic, and it's amazing how fluid and adaptive and how much change is possible. And also that's why, like, the importance of practice and integration and committing to this work, because you can go to the gym and lift 200 kilos, right? First of all, you'll struggle if you've never squatted on a barbell, but also really your muscles learn by the repetition. Your muscles learn by the consistency. And so our unconscious mind is so very similar. It's how can you really speak its language? How can you reinforce those patterns through visualization, through inquiry, through self-development, through discussion, in order to really up-level what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that is really so powerful. And this is typically what we're not taught at schools. And I think we need to be equipped with all of this, because as you mentioned, we take the time and to work our muscles and to exercise and to work out every day, when we really need the same level of commitment to work on our mindset. Camilia, I'm loving this conversation, but it's about time for us to wrap up this episode. So there are some last few questions that I usually love asking my guests. And before we wrap up, 3 questions. You can just tell me what comes through your mind. So what's the best piece of advice that you have ever been given?
Whoa, best piece of advice. There's so many, but I think the one I want to share, the one that comes through right now, is when I made my first high ticket coach investment. And it's not even advice, but it's the feeling that I got every time I related to this mentor of mine. And it's that literally everything I want is possible. And I think sometimes we all feel a little bit invincible and like it's all there for us, and then we get back into our routines and our environment, and we can start to see the constraints, and we think of the execution, and it's like, that's never going to happen. And really, really, really connecting to that truth of possibility is one of the most powerful practices, because I've been bursting one glass ceiling after another, and it feels so limitless. And it's the most wonderful journey. And it's like every time you get there, you normalize, you make it safe for your nervous system, and on to the next. So it's not even about getting somewhere, but it's about living in this field of not knowing and possibility. And it's just changed my life, and it makes life so much more enjoyable. So
amazing. Anything is possible. Yeah. Now, what's the worst piece of advice you have ever been given?
the worst piece of advice is dim your light.
Oh.
Dim your light. You're shining too bright. And I remember, I mean, this is from my corporate days of, you know, like you're a fiery, young, outspoken woman. It might not resonate with this middle-aged, you know, white male audience. Can you maybe
tune it down a little?
Turn the heat down so that your message lands. And don't get me wrong, speaking to your audience and operating in an empathetic way and having compassion and speaking a language that will connect to other people is really wonderful. And I definitely advise that people do that all the time. But you never have to dim your light to do that. And it's almost like, you know, put on a mask. And a lot of this work and the work that I stand for is how do we unleash people's most authentic expression so that they can be fully themselves, fully unleashed, and never have to think of, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? There isn't a wrong thing. Really take more risk than you think is acceptable, and give yourself permission to say what you really, really think and be the true version of yourself and see what'll happen. You might be surprised.
I love that. Thank you. Now, as we're wrapping up 2023 and getting ready for 2024, what's your recommendation like to start off the year in the best possible way? Is there anything that you personally do like to reflect on the past year and prepare for the new year, or what's something that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, something I love to do, and I have done with some of my clients, is getting you to really connect. Maybe you just want to imagine it in your mind. Maybe you want to journal and write it down. Maybe you want to go on a walk with your favorite person and share it with them. But really get very, very clear about the most ridiculous, if miracle after miracle after miracle were to happen in 2024, what would you be sharing? It's almost like, okay, you pick up the phone and you call me a year from now and you're like, oh my goodness, you're not going to believe the year I've had. What are you actually saying? And connecting to that unrealistic version, you know, so to say. And really getting clear on your sensory experience. So what are you wearing? Where do you live? What are you doing? What are the people around you? Who are you sharing your medicine with? What kind of sounds and music do you listen to? What do you taste in your mouth? What kind of food are you eating? And then the internal senses. What kind of thoughts are you having? What kind of patterns are you adopting? How are you treating yourself? How kind are you with yourself? What level of awareness? What does it feel like to be that version of you that's supposedly in the future? And once you can really feel it in your body, go to dinner and be that person.
Interesting.
You know, go to your next event, next meeting as future you, and think those thoughts, feel those feelings, make the decision that version would make. And then see if you can just become that without waiting for 2024 to come. Because it's like, you know, I do think this season is fun. It's such a period of death and rebirth. And so there's a lot of changes. But really, I started preparing for next year 3 months ago. And at the same time, I don't really give much, you know, importance to the spending time in the past or spending time in the future. It's more about how can you tune down the noise to be more present today.
I love that. I'll definitely give it a try. Camilia, this has been amazing. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you so much. We definitely have to bring you on again and again on the podcast because we've touched just on a fraction of the possible. Any final word you would like to leave us with? What's the best way to connect with you, for people to follow your work? Tell us everything.
Yeah, people can drop me a message on Instagram or LinkedIn. My handles are my full name, so Camilia Berrada all together. And final words is just do what you want, and you don't have to do anything. People have this idea that personal development is all about changing yourself, but like, don't forget to live your life. Like, we're not going to be here forever.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.